Don't yell at me like that. That's what I want to know. Who are you guys?
The truth is unattainable. It will always be shrouded in fog. You have no means to know the truth.
So he made himself forget that he was a shadow. He wanted to forget. He wanted people to like him. And that's how he came to look like this.
It shouldn't take a detective to tell you that Persona 4's sleepy town of Inaba is a dreary and barren waste, hardly being supported by its measly population. Always damp from rainfall and fog, Inaba struggles to keep itself afloat, both from the fading interest from its inhabitants, and from the looming threat of a ruthless murder amongst themselves that make up the bulk of the story in Persona 4, carving a legacy of bloodshed and ignorance for the backwater town. In a bold left turn from the previous outing in the series, Persona 4 instead chooses to separate itself from the bustling city life and air-conditioned malls of Persona 3's location and drags the idealized and stylish urbanite lifestyle of a special education island to its knees and presents it as total opposite to contrast. Shops open and go out of business as quickly as changing of the seasons, people retreat into their homes and refuse to socialize if the weather dictates it so, and the malaise of daily living found in the game's many characters presents itself as a Herculean task, a struggle many would say is hardly foreign. Many complain that Persona 4's tone is a step down from the blues and bloodshed of Persona 3, but I would argue that Persona 4's happy golden colors and finger-snapping hip-hop soundtrack hides a dark underbelly that even surpasses Persona 3's glumness, and how it refuses to hold its punches. Persona 3's overarching issues with its characters that each one must conquer the fear and acceptance of death, a theme so blatant it has its cast literally shoot themselves every time they wish to summon their personas. Persona 4 instead opts to have each character destroy a tarot card their character represents to their social link, essentially destroying the stereotype and traits the larger society they inhabit imprints onto them and establish themselves as a unique individual who can't be defined by something like a playing card, which leads into a fairly standard message of individuality and the value of relationships that JRPGs are more than comfortable with expressing. Despite its popularity, I hold no issues with this message. It's hardly anything new, and Persona 4 especially doesn't always seem to have its best foot forward when sticking to this message it's trying to portray, but I think overall it works for the game and provides a lot of meaningful discussions and interesting designs for the various bosses you have to fight throughout the game. I still remember how taken aback I was when I was fighting Shadow Chie for the first time, and then hoping that each fight afterwards would just be as intense and chock full of superb character writing. My excitement was nil once I found out that rather than a steady upward progression of challenging boss fights, both in terms of in-game difficulty and visual symbolism, the narrative progression of Persona 4 ended up being much more of a roller coaster ride up with more dips than loops. So it's like one of those teacup rides that you can occasionally spin nauseatingly fast with the wheel in the middle of each seat. I make it no secret that I find much of the character writing in Persona 4 to be spotty at best and outright flagrantly bad at worst. Most of your main cast's development starts and drops once they meet their shadows, making obtaining each party member feel like more of a chore than a triumph worthy of additional gameplay. Not all characters were created equally, however. Some feel like a scratch off a checklist, some I enjoy more than I reasonably should, and a few of them I would even call great, but there's only one who stands above them all. Shining star that blazes through the yellow sky like a crown atop a king's head, outperforming all the rest. Something tells me that Atlus themselves knew what a stroke of genius they created, because they advertised the best character in the game right on the front as the mascot.
But I do understand one thing now. I'm glad that I met you, Sensei.
Someone who at first seems like the game's obligatory mascot for marketing and to act as comic relief is quickly revealed as a staggering force of a character that reinforces the themes of self-discovery and the pursuit of truth and knowledge down to its very core and explode into a vibrant juggernaut of writing capability and subtlety that seem queerly beset for a young adult series like Persona, and especially for the standard that Persona 4 specifically sets for itself. The game leaves little to imagination. Character motivations are directly explained to the player through the plot device of a character's shadow, embodying their darkest traits and worst aspects of themselves in an easy-to-comprehend way of just stating it outright, rather than the use of anything more subtle. The murder mystery plot doesn't directly show all of its pieces until the very end of the game, to which once the pieces are revealed, connecting the dots becomes little more than a logical conclusion rather than any real deduction work having to be done in order to figure out who's the killer and what the fog means for Inaba. I understand how harsh that sounds, but for the most part, I hardly have an issue with it. Being too obvious is less of a personal failing of the game and more of a trait many pieces of media marketed to young adults possess. So to demerit a point from this game specifically when it was only following the footsteps of media before it seemed a little stupid. Persona 4's depth and symbolism largely work as a sliding scale rather than a binary good and bad system. Each side of this hypothetical slider would have the left side to be the most complex and meaningful symbolism for characters, while the right would be more clear-cut and understandable symbolism. But neither side represents a failing of symbolism. As a prime example, I point to one of your main party members featured in the game, Kanji Tatsumi. His personal shadow and arc is about his confusion and loosely defined view of masculinity he set up for himself, which Kanji can't follow when he's so deeply entrenched in feminist hobbies such as sewing and being sexually confused. These traits are only really brought up during his segment where you have to rescue him from his shadow world, or as means as a joke by another character. There's a half-hearted I accept myself speech from Kanji once he obtains his persona, but there isn't any character progression on his part afterwards, just getting upset when Yosuke calls him gay. It makes him feel like his character development only happens in one story segment, or in his free time events, which are entirely optional, you can miss, and don't always serve the purpose of developing him, but rather just improve his endgame stats and moveset. There's a tangible disconnect from his gameplay and narrative progression for his own personal arc and how the overall story plays out. Uniquely, Teddie is immune to this problem. Teddie's character introduction, progression, and implementation in the narrative and gameplay is entirely linear, but consistently terrific and happens concurrently, meaning Teddie can progress as a character as well as drive the story forward without having to interrupt it or overlap it. There was clear thought and heart behind his every action, fine-tuned to his dialogue and his relationship with other characters. In order to understand just who and what he is to the core, I will be dividing his key traits, design, role in the story, and gameplay usage into sort of chapters in order to collect my thoughts and present each aspect of his character I believe adds to his already staggering depth and development through the story, as well as covering other related topics I feel are both required and supplementary to discuss in order to obtain an accurate portrayal of who Teddie is, his relevance to the story of Persona 4, and exactly why I enjoy him as much as I do, and perhaps even being able to sway people into having a more favorable opinion of him. Given this video's length, I intend for this to be a comprehensive study. Perhaps this goes without saying, but this study will be largely mixing in in-game events and facts with my own interpretations and suggestions. I used as much evidence as I could in order to not make them feel too logistically improbable, but I am more than open to discussions and criticism. I'm hardly an expert in essays or video production, but any and all comments or likewise interaction left with this video would mean the world to me. And without further delay, here is my Teddie-centered Persona 4 analysis. Under normal circumstances, starting a discussion about Teddie's true identity as a shadow runs the risk of ignoring each moment Teddie had with the cast prior before the reveal. However, I feel it is necessary information to reveal right at the start in order to have a comprehensive understanding of Teddie's personality without having to repeat myself ad nauseum. I don't think many people were shocked to find out that Teddie was one of the shadows in the TV world who grew attached to the party and decided to tag along for the ride, but I feel like many people aren't entirely aware of what the stakes of that reveal entails, or the direness of Teddie's situation and the triumph he accomplishes as a shadow. A shadow, as defined in Persona 4, is a manifestation of a person's inner desires and worst aspects of themselves, sporting piercing yellow eyes and an attitude solely defined to bringing as much misery to their respective person as possible. There are countless examples of this in the game: Shadow Yosuke, Shadow Kanji, Shadow Naoto, etc. Each shadow is the character they represent with different colored clothes and eyes, but each existing to reveal critical personal thoughts about themselves and obtain a new monstrous form once their respective person denies that the shadow knows their most personal thoughts and desires, almost ubiquitously activated with the phrase, "You're not me." Bringing up Teddie, I ask, why does he look like that? Each shadow only transforms in context of a denial of identity and to serve as a boss fight, but why is Teddie's constant form a hollow bear costume? To answer this, I feel I must pose another question. Who was Teddie's original person? Shadows all come from people, but no mention of Teddie as a regular person prior to his bear form is found. No residents of Inaba mention anyone resembling him. He expresses no memories of his previous life and spends his whole social link trying to find out who he is or was to find some kind of comfortable foothold and a consistent identity. At the end of his social link, you find him inside of the Velvet Room, where he reveals that he repressed his true nature of being a shadow because of the pain of loneliness that was eating him alive from when he was able to think. Teddie is a remnant of an unknown person's regrets and desires projected into a blank shadow, left alone to suffer and toil without a person to torment. A shadow's entire purpose is to oppose the person whom they spawned from, but Teddie was denied that knowledge and had to cope without a soul to aid him. People are often annoyed by Teddie's childishness and naivete, but all of these less favorable traits are perfectly reasonable considering what Teddie is, a shadow, the worst parts of an individual. But without someone to oppose, could Teddie really be called a shadow? Igor and Teddie himself say he is as much, but on a symbolic level, what is a shadow without the light? Can someone be considered duality when half of what makes up a duality doesn't exist? What are they then? Defining Teddie as a shadow is technically true in terms of in-game lore, but thematically, he isn't a shadow because he opposes nothing. His traits cease to counter someone else, leaving him literally hollow inside. He has no one to go up against, and no one to accept him. He makes his home inside of the TV world because shadows cannot cross over into the regular world, a fact that haunts him and leaves him alone to stew, running away from other shadows whom he can't call his own. He is rejected by other shadows and unable to contact anyone, leaving him neglected on both sides. The despair of neglect caused him to take the form we recognize him as, the stuffed bear, or lack of stuffed bear. Teddie himself explains that the only wish is to be seen and loved by anyone he encounters, which becomes more and more common as people gradually explore televisions inside of Inaba. Despite his outward appearance, Teddie still feels incomplete, showing that his costume is just that, a costume which hides nothing inside, making him literally hollow. Once you beat Risei's dungeon, Teddie finds himself new confidence and can peer outside of the shadow world and take the form of a human boy, which he explains he grew inside of him. Teddie's ability to interact in the regular world seems to have some ties to his emotional state. Like when he goes missing shortly after Namatame is brought in, reverting to his costume form and unable to appear in the human world, though that could also be a result of him making the choice to withdraw. Teddie, despite being a shadow, can break the conventions of his very being and defy the binary split between the shadows and human world and cross between them at will through sheer willpower, something that even impresses the Velvet Room attendants like Igor. Perhaps one can say that Teddie's flexible shadow logic is a failing of the game's established lore rather than a triumph for the character, but I feel that coinciding with the game's message of discovering one's true self above all else, Teddie is able to break free from the Shadow World's rules is largely metaphorical to anyone being able to break free from a restrictive society and finding out who they truly are, lore or logic be damned. It's a meaningful arc tied brilliantly with the narrative and themes of the game. The most vexing part of Teddie's existence as a shadow is the fact that he has his own shadow, which carries some large implications. Despite the oxymoronic name, Shadow Teddie stands distinguished among every other shadow self displayed in the game thus far by being the total opposite of his person. Each other shadow carries the exact same personality, that being a callous, mocking tone that follows with each slip of the tongue that reveals more of the character's secrets, all while sporting a smug grin on their face, taking sadistic pleasure in tormenting their other half. Shadow Teddie is the exact opposite. He stands larger than life, eyes wide open with that sickly yellow hue that burrows through your skin and grazes the foam of your sea of souls, and speaks so quietly his cruel words can hardly register in the unfocused ear. Each word he spews is a harsh cut to Teddie's already flimsy sense of self-worth, and tears him apart with fierce brutality and reckless abandon. Shadow Teddie seems to take no joy in breaking Teddie's spirit, instead scolding him for his arrogance and trying to obtain the truth about his identity, speaking him to like a disappointed teacher rather than his total opposite. He speaks solemnly and broadly, scrutinizing the whole cast's effort to obtain the truth of the fog, revealing the dark underbelly of Teddie's psychology, and interacting with the player in ways each other shadow self was unable to. Aside from Chie's shadow, each character's shadow was self-contained, largely there to explain the character's issues like I went into detail with the introduction of the beginning of this video. Shadow Teddie holds no punches. He speaks to the entire party with cruel words and has no qualms with snuffing them all out, taking Teddie's most despised form to do so, himself. Shadow Teddie's boss segment, Transformation, is truly telling of how he feels about his predicament. Teddie is unable to picture himself more monstery than how he currently stands, with gnarled blue fur and twisting claws, more than ready to tear your party apart with little thought, a direct mockery of how he changed his shadow form to better suit himself with the living. The cracks in Teddie's costume display a clear fear of being figured out, a fear of having his true darkness exposed and the facade he tried to convince himself in the cast of crumbling apart. The inky black underneath the costume represents nothing, what Teddie fears most. He is horrified at Shadow Teddie's accusations of being hollow inside, deeply wounding Teddie because of the implication of that being literally hollow inside of his costume formed, carrying the insult of lacking the emotional depth of being someone worth recognizing and befriending. The darkness under the costume represents both the existence of his harmful thoughts that Teddie has, as manifested as his shadow, and the lack of color underneath representing that all he is underneath is his shadow self, that he exists only defined to oppose himself, a task that he, as a shadow, cannot exist. Teddie's fears of being useless were already up to a boiling point when you entered Risei's dungeon, but that fear of being seemingly confirmed crushes Teddie impactfully. The two blue eyes that peer from the darkness is filled with cold judgment, colder than ice. Colder than the ice that Teddie specializes in attacking with, attacks that must be guarded against if you want to stand any chance of surviving. Shadow Teddie grows to be several-fold bigger than what he was before, grasping desperately from a hole in Risei's dungeon while he roars about the subjectivity and nihilism that searching for the truth entails, demanding that the cast ceases their search and dies quietly at the hand of his claws. The denial of his truth and attempts to stop the party from finding out why the fog is appearing shows a dark dualism in Teddie's goal in self-discovery. He wants the fun journey with the cast, but fears eventually having to reconcile with either the lack of answers from the journey or having to deal with the truth that Teddie is a shadow without a host, reducing his self-worth and reason for sticking alongside the party down to nothing. Teddie is perhaps suicidally strict to this. In stopping Risei's shadow just before the battle with his own, Teddie steps forward and essentially bombs himself to stop her, with little care to his own health. He finds each party member's concern of him to be touching, and he quickly finds himself surrounded by those who cared for him before his shadow splits from his back. Shadow Teddie fights like a primitive beast, swiping and slashing at the party with overwhelmingly physical attacks that can knock everyone down, charging up physical and ice attacks to nearly instantly KO a character, if not your whole party. While his attacks are predictable, Teddie easily proves to be the hardest boss in the game up to that point, with the cast even commenting that they were shocked that Teddie held so much darkness inside of him. Once the shadow is eventually defeated, Teddie is brought to his knees, ashamed of his own shadow, but thankful to have companions on his side, compounding his attachment issues as he sobs softly with only a couple reassuring comments from his friends. Teddie then earns his first persona and asks to be alone for a while, explaining that he wants to be able to contribute more to the team and fight alongside them as you encourage him on his path to self-improvement. Little did Teddie know that the existence of his own shadow would prove both to be his lowest moment, but also his highest. The implication that Teddie would even have a shadow solves the issue of his identity. He is no longer a shadow without a host. Through the connections he has established with the cast, he has become his own man, able to wield personas, carry a shadow, and even become a human in the real world. Teddie always carried the potential to become his own person inside of him, but just needed the push of fighting his own shadow and gaining his persona to accept that. In this instance, Teddie has broken his own personal limits by revealing his secrets, but also broken the in-game lore by becoming his own person and living in the real world, despite being a shadow. Which I think makes for a powerful message, even if the in-game execution is a little sloppy. Teddie strides an achievement far and above every other character, jiving closest to the message of discovering your own self, and despite of everything else. He literally breaks the rules of the shadow world just to become a person with the power of friendship. If that doesn't exemplify the themes of this game more than anyone else, I don't know what does. As much as I'd like to pretend to be above these kinds of cliches, I'm unfortunately not. Teddie just happens to be a shining example of the power of friendship done correctly, in my opinion. In such a game where character development is optional, Teddie stands out among the rest. I don't even have to go into that much depth on why I like it, it's just the fact that he does something and goes somewhere. To summarize the last two chapters, Teddie's unique circumstances as a shadow and his boss fight do leaps and bounds for developing him beyond his peers, and stick closest to the established themes, making for a very three-dimensional character. So right off the bat, Teddie presents himself as an amicable, well-meaning, but gullible and cowardly ally, asking for help from the main cast and getting rid of the fog plaguing his home inside of the TV world. He cites something or other of a lack of muscles for his excuse as to why he doesn't go out trying to find out why the shadows are becoming more violent, instead choosing to solely rely on the outside effort of his friends, proving to be a shorthand for Teddie, lacking the strength and confidence to do anything himself, as I've previously discussed in the other chapters. Teddie is morbidly codependent on his human friends throughout the entirety of the story. Even when he finds the resolve to fight as a party member, he aims to be as sociable and as cherished as possible. Teddie's social interactions are warranted to have an entire separate chapter block to discuss in further depth, but Teddie's need to be liked by others is a prevalent action all throughout the game. Teddie is willing to speak, act, and dress accordingly to what he deems necessary to garner attention and praise from people, using positive interactions to feel worthwhile. A prime example of this is Teddie's human form, something he takes great pleasure in flaunting and teasing his friends with, especially Yukiko and Chie, as well as Kanji when Yosuke makes fun of him by asking if Teddie was his type. Teddie delights in being an object of affection, so much so that his desire to be loved and accepted manifests into asking nearly any woman he sets his eyes on to score, a word he doesn't entirely understand, but the intentions are still clear. The cross-dressing competition later in the game was largely played for laughs, but Teddie's willingness to go above and beyond into a gag and swaying the sexuality of teen boys goes to show how far he's able to swing to be seen as desirable by his friends, and pedestrians who don't even know his name. Teddie is perceptible to harsh mood swings, easily brought down from a bubbly mood to a sodden stupor when met with any resistance to something he said or an action he did, something he's quick to weaponize to gain sympathy and get his way. When shopping for clothes in Junes, when his human form was first revealed, he played up how sullen he was to eke pity out of Chie, as well as being stunned into silence by Yosuke's minor scoldings. I feel I should mention distinction for when Teddie's pretending or exaggerating his sadness versus when he's genuine displays of sorrow. The music swells and his model quivers in fear when genuine expressions of misery shine through, often taking place in private moments between Teddie and the protagonist. Without proper music cues, it's likely that he's exaggerating his feelings to get something out of someone. If I may go on a tangent, I like to gush about how lovely Sam Riegel's performance as Teddie is in Persona 4 Golden. I think that Wittenberg's performance was totally serviceable and felt natural in the standard Persona 4, but Riegel gives that initial impression and maxes out the energy and range, truly making Teddie unique among his peers. It's far less of a drastic voice actor change compared to Chie's swapping voice actresses, but rather an expansion based on a groundwork provided by the vanilla version. The vocal range on display is excellent. All at once he is bright, bombastic, with tons of energy and an eagerness to converse, but keeps his squeaky charm and clarity in his more dour and oppressed moments, without being too verbose to explain. I think he sounds like a mascot character should, a balance of being kind of annoying like a SpongeBob-esque manner to increase marketability and sell plushies to kids, but also giving him an in-depth character arc and dialogue befitting of an M-rated character. I suspect some may find it jarring to have such a cartoonish character lamenting about how when he fades away, he won't be able to go to heaven to see someone he believes to be dead, but if the length of this analysis hasn't made it apparent, I find this contrast wonderfully executed. The dualism of Teddie's emotional expression shouldn't be underrated. He goes out of his way to ensure people understands how he feels, but that desire is underpinned by a fear of people figuring him out, something he himself fears. He walks a fine line between being vulnerable and relatable to his friends, but also hiding away from things he doesn't have the strength to confront, using social interaction like a fuel to keep himself afloat. Teddie is complacent with exaggerating minor events to get pity from people, but each time he does so, it's for a minor problem that could be easily solved. He desperately craves comfort and attention from his friends to solve his problems, but is too afraid to reveal the darkest issues to them, so he figures that being scolded by Yosuke and acting like it cut him too deep is a proxy method of feeling like his friends can fix his problems without him having to reveal himself and potentially make them think lesser of him. I believe it's a frighteningly accurate portrayal of a struggle to connect with people while walking a balance of being safe from having to expose yourself from the truth you don't want them to hear. No other character in the main cast has as complex or a troubled relationship with each other, elevating him above the rest monumentally. While he avoids talking about himself when it doesn't befit his image, Teddie takes genuine interest in his friends' hobbies and problems. His advice and comments may be unneeded or outright unintentionally offensive, but his intent is genuine, and he is unafraid of showing support and love and offers to help with any kind of struggle they face, which endears him to a cast of varying degrees. Unless you're Yosuke. First impressions are everything, especially in Japanese culture. So, unbefitting of how he typically acts to woe anyone he first meets, the first time you meet Teddie in game is when he points his paws at you for being the suspects throwing bodies into the television and reacts by demanding you to stop, something he quickly drops as you progress further in the game, never to be heard again. This moment is at odds with how he is introduced with nearly every other character in the game, who he meets with a large smile and inviting arms. His level of affection does vary, however. Teddie takes a keen interest in women and relationships, especially your female party members. From as soon as he meets them, Teddie asks Chie, Yukiko, Rise, and Marie for several requests for dates and contact, like massages and other activities involving closeness of the body, sporting an obvious sexual energy to them. Both parties are often oblivious to the true intentions. Yukiko hardly even listens to Teddie, and Teddie doesn't seem to understand what words like scoring means. But Teddie's desire for sexual companionship is laid bare. The exception to this behavior is Naoto, who he believed to be a male until the very end of her dungeon. Compounding this with his previously discussed topics of loneliness and isolation, Teddie's desire for sex can easily be seen as a way to establish a personal connection between someone. A major strike against Teddie in the story of Persona 4 is how he doesn't carry much of a relationship with any of the game's antagonists. Given that he's stuck in the TV world for far too much of the story, he has no interesting conflict or contrast with Adachi, Namatame, or even Izanami. He's hardly even on screen with Adachi, so the two can't share anything more than just a general motif of loneliness being their primary character arc motivation, a trait hardly exclusive to them, but instead being the two best examples of that motif in the game. It's a strange issue when one of your main party members' interaction with NPCs and nameless bystanders is more impactful than the interaction with your main party, but Persona 4's fundamental issues with its cast affect everyone, even the best characters in that cast. I have a separate chapter for Teddie's more meaningful interactions with your party members and NPCs, being the protagonist, Yosuke, Nanako, and Rise, so until then, I won't comment on their relationship until that chapter is brought up. I don't mean to imply that each social link and NPC in the game requires a rich history and subtext with Teddie, but I think I would have preferred the all over nothing. Narratively, it's solid. Teddie has to introduce himself to the human world because he's never stepped foot in it until around halfway through the game, but he only really established a meaningful connection with a few characters, not all of which are in your party. I think it hurts his character arc overall if I have to say nothing about the major characters interact with each other, but it's the naked truth. Teddie being an Activision employee is as deep as it goes with Chie, Yukiko, and Marie. He earnestly cares for each one and seeks to protect them as friends, but this is something only told and confronted by a villain rather than having a dedicated moment to show us outright. This issue is especially glaring with Marie. Marie already has questionably believable relationships with the cast already in my opinion, but Teddie hardly has any connection with her for someone he apparently cares for so much. All he has to say is that he's jealous of the protagonist's ability to get girls and considers sweeping her off her feet to get some tail. Teddie has basically no lines talking about Naoto because his role as a navigator is taken by Rise at this point in the story, so he's just slotted as a party member in the age-old flaw of JRPGs to collect party members and have nothing to do with them. It's unfortunate to say, but Teddie loses a lot of steam after the midway point in the game is over with, because the central issue is solved, so he's just tagging along until the fog is gone so he can go home. Kanji might as well be a gag character with how little he has to do in the story. Aside from a few throwaway lines with Yosuke and Naoto, Kanji is almost entirely flat and serves no purpose of being there, so trying to stretch out the video talking about his lackluster relationship with Teddie seems kind of pointless. The most I can say between the two is that Teddie sometimes teases Kanji with his boyish charm, asking if Kanji is gay and seeing if he can get some kind of reaction out of him, which isn't much different from nearly everyone's interaction with him. Curiously, the Velvet Room attendants have a confusing but interesting relationship with the little guy. Igor knows well enough about him to comment on his sudden and lampshaded appearance inside the Velvet Room, something his nature as a shadow should prevent him from doing, but seems complacent, even somewhat impressed by it, in case the game hadn't made it clear enough that Teddie has long since surpassed his limits as a shadow. For being the most well-rounded character in the party, Teddie's relationships with others exist on a pretty harsh scale of being great to bog standard, even by leftover JRPG party member standard. Even in his most standout moments, Persona 4's most troubling aspects still rear their ugly heads. They say emulation is the most sincere form of flattery, which I hope rings true because I used PCX2 to emulate this game. Then just like PCX2, Teddie wants nothing more than to emulate a popular PS2 JRPG protagonist. As the protagonist, you're all there for Teddie's darkest moments and his lightest. You see his shining heroism and his seething lust all laid bare, with no stone left unturned. It's a group effort, but your efforts are especially resonating with him, as he begins to refer to you as Sensei, despite Teddie's age being unclarified. Sensei is still used to communicate a sense of empowerment to the player, as well as the gratefulness and appreciation Teddie has for him in his life. His admiration goes way beyond just a brotherly love, however. Teddie's romantic inclinations manifest in a questionable way, with scenes that wouldn't feel out of place to describe as gay baiting, with somber music swelling and Teddie getting within nipple-rubbing distance of you before your family comes to the door to interrupt it. I interpret the scene as Teddie still putting you on sort of a pedestal, acting submissive and demure like a typical housewife in order to praise him and acknowledge the power dynamics Teddie cemented in his mind. He tries to be you, but still holds you in a higher regard than himself. It's a confusing web of identity problems and sexuality that makes me wish I forget the scene happened every time I watch it. He visits Nanako in the hospital privately and confides in her and nurtures her like real family, strengthening and emulating that Teddie is trying to have and use life. Yu was one of 2 people that tried to become friends with him upon meeting him for the first time, who was able to save him from himself and give hope for the future and trust in himself and others. Distinct from everyone else, Teddie only mimics the sociable protagonist in this manner, unlike those he holds especially close. In part of the protagonist to have a tangible example of your effect on this character, and to give Teddie footing in his arc to becoming a human by copying the man he most admires, Yu. Talking about Nanako becomes far simpler to explain after explaining Yu, so I'll continue from that point. Given Nanako's age, she isn't terribly wordy or complicated expression-wise when discussing her relationship with Teddie, but her dialogue still indicates a deep personal relationship, viewing Teddie as a surrogate older brother, just as she views Yu. Once she gets out of the hospital towards the end of the game, the first thing she wants to do is take advantage of the fresh snowfall and make snowmen shaped like Teddie. If that isn't an obvious enough clue into her feelings, then I'm not sure what is. The snowman example is one of the few times this relationship is shown and not explained, but given Nanako's age, I think the game is allowed to get away with implying these events off-screen rather than showing a dozen slightly different scenes of the 2 doing arts and crafts together. By and large, the most impactful scene the 2 share is when Nanako is in the hospital and Teddie comes to comfort her. Teddie's monologue about his regret of not spending enough time with her brings comfort to Nanako, who is able to wake up from her coma from the sound of Teddie's voice and makes a slow recovery. The 2 are obviously close and share immense trust between each other, sometimes even reinforced by other cast members. The only reason Teddie is even able to shake off his depression's final social link event is because Nanako was able to survive her illness. Curiously, Dojima has little to nothing to say about Teddie. For a surprisingly competent detective, he doesn't suspect anything awry with the world's horniest teddy bear. I was honestly expecting some kind of scene where Dojima puts the pieces together to deduce Teddie's questionably human nature, but from what I remember, there isn't any. He just lets this strange Tommy Taffy man into his home. If Yu is his sensei and Nanako is his younger sister, then Yosuke easily fits the role as Teddie's best friend. Alongside Yu, Yosuke has known Teddie for the longest, something easily reflected in their dynamic. Teddie easily frustrates Yosuke in countless ways, but still highly values and respects him. It's easy to describe their dynamic as being very brotherly, with Teddie taking the role as the pestering little brother. He prods and pokes at Yosuke's possessions and hobbies with interest, taking no moment to spare being interested in Yosuke's life. Despite his bemusement, Yosuke is glad to have Teddie around, even if it drains his wallet and gives him migraines. He offers his house for Teddie to stay at despite all the harsh words he has for him, and employs him with a job at Junes, even if he's being criminally extorted for below average wages. Yosuke doesn't mind taking advantage of Teddie's naivete, but Teddie doesn't mind as well, as long as he spends more time with Yosuke. Teddie intentionally bugs Yosuke more than the rest of the cast because of the unspoken trust the 2 have between each other. Despite how taxing it is to live with Yosuke, Teddie knows that he has his back when matters become dire and demands a serious attitude. And really, can you even call 2 people friends if they don't banter over each other about women? Justifying why I've put Rise in a category of her own requires an explanation. To set the stage where I want to start things off in the story, Rise has just been thrown inside the TV, and Teddie's confidence as a navigator, as a friend, and his fears of being a shadow are all catching up to him, leading to his self-destructive moments of being hollow and his nose not being as useful as it was before, requiring you to get clues around town. The very first thing he says when you speak to him is, "I wasn't crying," which indicates a crystal clear window to his mood. Like mentioned, his nose, which was his method of finding people inside of the television world, hasn't been up to snuff, so the party is required to do detective work to give Teddie a clue to latch onto. What registers as the correct clue to progress is the hint that Rise's true personality and feelings are intentionally separated from her public appearances on TV and in the magazines. That Rosette, her idol persona, is just that, a persona that Rise pretends to be, while she acts totally at odds with any other situation she's in not related to her job, which is an extreme enough difference to where a gossiper you meet in the search would say, you'd never recognize her in real life. This clue and description are relayed back to Teddie in the television world, where he gives an odd reaction, atypical to finding someone in the TV world. He comments that her true self, separated from her idol personality, is delicate and sentimental, saying how she resembles himself, an odd thing to assume for someone you've never met. Once the party meets up with Rise and her shadow, they quickly find out that her analytical abilities make her impossible to defeat, until Teddie steps in. Sick of feeling like he doesn't contribute to his team, he steps up and essentially suicide bombs Shadow Rise, much to her and the party's surprise. Once both her and Teddie's shadows are done and dealt with, Rise personally thanks Teddie and gives him a much needed confidence booster, motivating Teddie to do crunches until he literally grows into his new skin. Rise's compassion is proudly displayed when she coos over Teddie, something he takes great joy in. I should mention that Teddie's character development isn't specially all because of Rise, but his confidence in battle and aspects of connecting to other people are certainly connected to her. It's mentioned several times in dialogue that Rise likes to pester Teddie, similar to how Teddie pesters Yosuke in a friendly but mocking manner. These are typically shown to the player, but given how many times we're shown this, it alludes to a deeper connection between the two than many people would assume. Rise's role as a team navigator once she replaces Teddie is indicative to their unspoken but powerful connection. When she isn't able to sniff out Adachi later in the game, she laments that Teddie always seemed like the more capable party member, losing confidence and believing she's replaceable, much like Teddie did when she was trying to search for her. It isn't until Teddie comes back from running away when these feelings are resolved, with Rise's reaction being the strongest. She sobs into his chest and chastises him for leaving, but is thankful to have him back. He asks if she's faking her tears, but she insists that she sorely missed him, giving a brief but quiet and tender moment between the two. There's a laundry list of similarities between the two characters, and I'm not just referring to fighting both of their shadows in one sitting. Both are characters with considerably more tangible issues of identity than the rest of the cast, but with Rise being torn between her idle and regular living personas, unsure of who she truly is, and Teddie not knowing where he comes from and struggling with accepting that he isn't human. Both characters are outwardly optimistic and extroverted, but their most dire moments reveal a far gloomier and pessimistic shade to them. Both are considered flirtatious and comfortable with their sexuality, and both use it to make up for something else they feel like they lack. They are both at one point navigators for the main party, have a primary color of red in their character designs, and so forth. I believe all these to be intentional on the part of Atlus, which makes the small number of tender scenes together sting that much more. I'm not asking for any kind of canon ship between the two, but another scene of the two conversing about their issues or something of the like would be helping greatly recognizing their connection. I think what they have together is beyond sweet and lovely, but a little lampshading for the average player. It's a beautiful connection between two party members that doesn't rely on the player character at all, which is a rare feat in the game. Also, I tried to look up people talking about the two on Google and found no discussions, but just a dozen images of Teddie clapping Rise's cheeks, so sorry to disappoint. Before he steps in the ring as a playable party member, once you beat Rise's dungeon, Teddie acts as the navigator for the party, identical to the functions of Mitsuru and Fuka in the previous game, but he proved himself to be far more hench than those two of those feeble high school age girls, because he doesn't even need a damn persona to navigate the dungeons. Discussing his mechanics as a navigator isn't particularly interesting because many of the roles narrators have in Persona are largely cosmetic or in some cases just not relevant. Using Analyze to find enemy weaknesses isn't all that exciting when you were playing this game in 2008 if you didn't know how to use GameFAQs. The use of a narrator is mostly a narrative tool, having means of a character able to explore and introduce the characters into the dungeons as well as the player to how the battle system works. It isn't until around 15 hours of gameplay until Teddie properly joins the party as a controllable member, giving the player access to his niche moveset focusing on support and ice damage. In the vanilla version of Persona 4, Teddie's role in battle is largely for buffing stats and healing party members, while in Golden he's given a few more physical options to slot Teddie into a nice little niche where he can cover all bases at once, while proving to be a powerful member depending on your team makeup. I would highly advise not having Yosuke and Teddie in the same team, for example, because of how similar they are in battle, but unlike Yosuke, I believe Teddie pairs up quite well with Yukiko. If you build your protagonist as a physical build, have Teddie as the occasional ice spell, but largely use him for buffs and healing, using Yukiko for ailment healing and magic damage, throw in Naoto for your team just because of how busted she is in Golden, and congrats, you've broken Persona 4 Golden over your knee like a twig. You don't need to have a specific team makeup to make Teddie useful because of his nature as a support and buffing character, he's never going to not be useful. But he's still something of a jack of all trades, master of none deal, so don't expect him to be the best in dealing ice damage. His healing capabilities aren't quite up to snuff with Yukiko's, his buffs aren't as overpowering as Chie's, nor do his ice attacks hit very hard, and basically every other character outclasses him physically. Teddie isn't meant to be the apex of any stat or strategy, but rather a complement to everyone else fitting an otherwise missing role, or if you just want to have two dedicated healers if you're just getting filtered at Shadow Naoto. Teddie stands out from every other cast member by having his social link be mandatory as you progress through the story, rather than being optional events like every other cast member, meaning his persona will become more useful and gain more resistances than anyone else provided if you don't do any social links, which you should, unless you're speedrunning the game, I guess. In December 5th in-game, his persona will automatically upgrade and you'll gain resistances to wind and dark, as well as nullifying ice. Golden goes one step further by letting you block wind and dark entirely, and absorbing ice for extra health. Granted, with some basic time management skills, anyone won't be impressed by gaining a Persona's second or even third form because of how easy it is to do so. But having Teddie be the introduction to such a mechanic shows that Atlus was thinking critically about his implementation in the game as a beginner's tutorial into leveling up personas without leaving the player fully in the dark. Point is, Teddie's role as a jack of all trades, capable of being useful in any team structure, fits thematic positioning as someone willing to do anything to be accepted by the characters as the player goes through his combat integration. A character's personas, the beings they summon into battle to fight for them, they pull from stories, mythology, and all their respective cultures to craft unique and identifiable representations of each character. It can encompass their looks, feelings, desires, likes, dislikes, and just about anything with all how nebulous the concept of personal identity is, especially in the given context of how the sense of identity manifests in gameplay and character designs in Persona. With Teddie, his personas are particularly strange, even among the strange designs present in the game. His first one, Kintoki Doji, takes on a distinctive robot design which matches Teddie's color scheme, but bears little resemblance to him personally. Perhaps his mechanical nature could reflect Teddie's feelings of being hollow, or a robot, maybe? It's not something I entirely understand, but given how confusing he is as a character to begin with, I'm assuming the artist just got a lot of freedom to do what he wanted. The name is where things become far more interesting. According to the Megami Tensei wiki, Kintoki Doji's name comes from the Japanese folk hero Kintaro, a boy who is raised in the mountains among animals, kind of like a Japanese Tarzan. It's a tale of harnessing inert masculinity, which being raised by wolves and the ability to survive in a mountain reflects nicely on Teddie's desire to be seen as a powerful masculine figure, calling back to his references of being a reincarnation of a king, as well as all the animals tying back into his bear costume form. Kintaro often carried a tomahawk in battle, which translates into the modern age as a tomahawk missile that Kintoki Doji heaves over his head. It's far from my favorite persona design, but I think it's done nicely enough to make its user feel adequate. His second persona, Kamui, is essentially one giant reference to bears. Kamui, used in the context, refers to a deity of bears and mountains, being an obvious allusion to Teddie and his previous persona's association with mountains and animals. He sports long bear-like claws and chooses to put the tomahawk missile of his previous persona straight up his ass. I seriously have no idea what that's supposed to communicate. Is he getting pegged? Does he have a stick up his ass? I'm really baffled as to why he just has the missile in there. Then again, it's far from the most sus design of Persona 4. Narukami's starting persona even has a robot bussy, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised with the vague sexual designs. It's still kinda gross. Exclusive to Golden, Kamui Moshiri takes Kamui's design and missile probe in his ass all the way up to 11. The missiles become larger and even more stuck in his ass, where he grants a flowing red cape and crown, along with rainbow stripes down his nose? Comparatively, Kamui's design was a lot more flamboyant and expressive and given a pretty regal coat of paint, further strengthening Teddie's kingly motifs. In mythology, Kamui was already perceived as a god by many of the Ainu people of Asia, but the new composite name of Kamui Moshiri expresses a far more powerful role in this loosely defined mythology I had struggled trying to look up. He is something of a creator god, shaping the earth for men to walk on, but takes on a backseat role to other figures once his job as creation is finished. It resembles the accomplishments of the Hindu god Brahma quite a bit, sharing the role as a lackadaisical creator god. All in all, Teddie's personas all share similar motifs and iconography: mountains, bears, Japanese folk legends, royalty, and technology. The technology aspect aside, these motifs are all wonderfully connected to its user. It has a more outrageous design philosophy than the other personas of the game, but it's pretty reasonable considering the user was the same person in the same breath, tries to blow himself up to save his friends, and then laments about his fur being rough when he accidentally survives. I have a few more tidbits and fun facts I could share, but I think I've thoroughly run my course and presented enough of my points to make a reasonable video. Microsoft Word is starting to lag with how many pages I have, so I think I should call it a day here. If people like this video enough, I could consider doing some kind of add-on video or fixing any of the flaws I find in this one, because I'm sure there's a handful, but I think I'd like to just thank you for getting this far. Again, I thank you very, very dearly for making it all the way here, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I certainly hope it was better than the last one I made. I upgraded from my cheap headset microphone to a pricier and more professional one, so I hope there's a more noticeable jump in sound quality. I have a lot to learn in video making, and all these little tips and tricks that go into production do certainly help a lot. Though I feel like at the end of the day I can always just go back to my script and nitpick I didn't make a strong enough point, or cringe at myself recording lines, or go through my audio and find lines that didn't work. There's a million things I could nitpick about, but at the end of the day, I just want this video to come out so I can learn from it and make even better stuff. I definitely underestimated how easy it was to make a project like this, but for an hour-long video my first attempt, I honestly thought I did pretty well. Not amazing, I'm not expecting some kind of 100,000 views, but I'm pretty confident to say I can get about 100 of them. And every 101 of them I gotta thank, so thank you. Thank you very, very much. I very much appreciate everyone clicking on the video. It means the world to me. Take care, guys. I hope I can start uploading again once school's done with. Until then, see ya.